Hello everyone, and thank you all for tuning in and participating in this panel discussion. My name is Adrian Dorci. I'm the head in Uni Global of UniScore, which stands for Strategic Campaigns, Organizing, Education and Research. But that's enough about me. Let's talk about the session. This session, we will discuss about the reasons of the latest unionizing trends we have seen in the tech sectors and how actually tech workers are organizing into unions. But before we go to our wonderful panel, let's start with a short video which we have prepared, which should a little bit set the stage for the discussion and this panel.
There is this misconception that tech is very glamorous and that employees are very well taken care of.
They may have better pay sometimes, not all of them.
But in reality, tech is just like every other industry. The employees' well-being is never really the main concern. You work very, very hard. You have a lot of motivation to work hard. You work on very exciting projects, and you end up working too much.
Big tech companies frequently give workers lots of positive surface level things, but at the end of the day, Google doesn't give workers much of a voice. 4 of my coworkers were laid off for talking within the company about things that they were unhappy with.
They want to have a say when it comes to salaries, they want to have a say when it comes to working conditions.
There's not as much job security anymore in tech.
As you well know, we had those layoffs at the beginning of this year.
There's an increase in fear, but there's also an increase in motivation.
It's also about ethical questions. What are we allowed to do? What can we work on? Where can we say, stop, I don't want to work on this topic, I don't want to work on this project?
They, as part of that company, have an opportunity, have the ability to influence that company's behavior, but the only way to do that is by forming a union and through the collective bargaining process.
It's important to work together because you're stronger together, and therefore it is important to form a union and to join the union so that you can improve your working conditions and stand for yourselves.
Unions are the opportunity, the only guaranteed way to make sure that you have a voice in the process.
We are not against the companies. We are a constructive force.
I think it's important to see that we need patience. We need to start working with a small group of members to get stronger, to be able in the end to get a collective agreement.
These companies don't recognize borders. These companies are global and operate on all corners of the globe.
대부분 멀티내셔널 글로벌 컴퍼니 구조를 가지고 있고, 그리고 본사에서 정해진 임금 또는 조직, 저희 한국에 있는 임원들이 결정할 수 없는 상황에 놓여 있습니다.
Sie müssen verstehen, dass Sie in jedem Land die Gewerkschaftsrechte akzeptieren müssen, und wir können nicht akzeptieren. Und unsere Antwort darauf ist Vernetzung. Vernetzung, um Stärke aufzubauen, um Gemeinsamkeit zu leben.
And so the workers need to step outside of their borders, and that's the only way that we're going to be able to rise together.
To act ourselves, not to wait for someone. To start now from day one to unionize, to connect. To start on a national level and continue then on an international level.
Our challenges are definitely the same and our goals are definitely the same at the end of the day.
So we have a fight on our hands and we're going to be ready one more time. Are we ready to fight?
Okay, thank you very much. Let's now move to our amazing panel. Our participants are Oliver Hauser. Oliver is the organizer for fintech and tech sectors here at ver.di in Berlin. Then we have Phoebe Schmidt. Phoebe is the vice chair of the Works Council in the tech company Contentful, and she works here in the wonderful city of Berlin, if I understood it right.
Yep.
And finally, we have Florentin Janku.
Yes.
Almost got it right. We always try to train that. And Florentin is the president of the IT and Tech Workers Union SITT in Romania. Let's go to our first question to the panel, and which is basically, let's exchange a little bit, have a quick look about the current trends of unionizing, how it actually started, and what is moving at the moment in your countries, in Germany, in your company, Contentful, or in Romania. So when and why did tech workers start to organize? And maybe just to give some introduction remarks, it's not the first time actually. When we looked a little bit back, what we see is already in the 70s, for example, we had with IBM Workers United, some amazing IBM workers who fought against the use of their technologies, how their company was connected to the apartheid in South Africa, worked with communities to change that. So I see there is actually a history in this tech organizing. But also just go back some years until, I would say, 2018, when we had the Googlers, the global walkout, which was all over the media because also of sexual harassment which happened in the company. We had the Tech Won't Build It movement talking about there is the need to be a stronger workers' voice globally. Then the return to the office after COVID, which was for many people a very vocal point. But this year specifically, we had layoffs, which also changed a lot in the dynamic of how people unionized, organized, wanted a voice at their workplace to change things for the good. And I would say, from a global perspective, what we have seen is a shift a little bit, that in the past, often the companies were seen as good companies, they will take care of us, what the companies are built is for the common good. And that has changed, is a bit the impression which I have at a global level. Maybe we will hear more also from our participants, that today it's more shareholder driven. Also, and that's what the workers also feel, the tech workers. And the response to that is also unionizing. But enough from me. Let's go to Oliver. Oliver, tell us about Germany.
Yeah. In general, everything you said globally is also something we can see here, obviously. But I would go for two different things. The more classical IT industry, like IBM, as you mentioned, SAP, they also have an increasing activities in unionizing. That's a good thing. But also in tech, like the modern tech companies have raising unionizing with a slightly different legislation in Germany than many other countries because we have works councils here. So the first step of organizing in most cases is founding a works council or trying to win works council elections as union members. This is the first step. And then, of course, actually unionizing in a union is the second step. That also happens slowly. But we see a lot of raising numbers in works councils. So like more and more works councils, which had a kind of bad reputation in the last years. This also shifts now, luckily. And we see increasing numbers in works councils. So like in tech companies like SoundCloud, Spotify, pretty recently, yesterday, Shopify in Berlin, Contentful a while ago. That's the situation in Germany, I would say.
Okay, maybe you can tell us firsthand how it was to organize and when you started and why.
Yeah, sure. So I'm the vice chair. I'm a software developer and the vice chair of the Works Council at Contentful. We're a business-to-business content management software company with about 800 employees worldwide and about 380 in Germany, and 350 of those are in Berlin. Our Works Council was elected last July, so we're a little more than a year old, but the effort to form that Works Council started even a year before that, probably March, April 2021. And we started by forming a Telegram group of kind of interested people that had talked about Works Councils on a personal level, and found out pretty quickly this was not quite the right group of people to make this happen. What we ended up with was a group of employees that had been around for a long time, that wanted a works council, but didn't have any energy or time to actually make it happen. So I nearly gave up at that point, but instead what I did was sign up for 2 trainings, one with Uni Global and one with Jane McAlevey, Organizing for Power. And these trainings are about unionizing, but we tried to use these skills that we learned to form a works council. And yeah, so that started around November 2021. In March 2022, we kicked off the process, and our council was elected in July. And it was a big success. We're a 9-person work council, and everyone is worker-aligned, worker-friendly. And what's also important in tech is that works council tenures are 4 years long. But in tech, there's a lot of high turnover. It's pretty rare that someone would stay at the company for more than 1 or 2 years. So we wanted to have a super long list of alternates so that hopefully this council could survive for up to its full 4 years. And we were elected with 21 substitutes. 1 year later, we now are down to 13 substitutes. But that's a big success for a works council election. 2 more things I want to mention to this question. The first is that the return to office policy was the issue that got me interested. Mid-pandemic, my partner also worked at a tech company that had a works council already. Contentful did not have one. And both companies were introducing return to office policies. And both were asking for feedback. But the difference was, at his company, they couldn't actually move forward implementing the policy until the works council agreed. But at my company, they just pretended to ask for feedback and continued to do whatever they wanted. And for me, this was the aha moment where I thought, this is such a cool, important worker protection. Everyone should have one. We have to form one at Contentful. So we did. The last thing I want to mention is that we have quite low union density, unfortunately, I think around 1.5%. But with the 1-year-old Works Council, I think there's a lot more consciousness of collective power and of workers' rights topics at Contentful, and we're beginning, with the help of Oliver and ver.di, a push to try and get those numbers higher. But we're at the beginning of that journey.
Thank you very much for your story. Yeah, let's applause for it. Florentine, you have the floor.
Thank you. Well, in Romania, and especially with SITT, is a bit of a, I'd say, different story, more or less. So our union counts today about 9,000 members. We started back in 2009. Actually, listening to you, Adrian, I realized that we've managed to turn a spontaneous movement, which was caused by a big transfer of activity from former company Alcatel-Lucent to a different company, and we've managed to transform that into what it is today, SITT. Back then, we wouldn't have imagined we could go all the way. Now, these dynamics within the sector, you know, mergers, acquisitions, all of that has pushed us right from the beginning to move to different companies as well, because obviously as Alcatel has sold part of the activity to a different company, we went to that company as well, trying to unionize through our former colleagues. And when they've sold another part of the company, we went to the other company as well, which is Accenture. So we unionized through that as well. Now, happily, 2016, we've met Uni Global, and together we've pushed for an accelerated organizing model within the sector. Fast forward 2023, we are now close to 9,000 people. We've managed to organize companies like Nokia, Atos, Honeywell, Accenture, Wipro, lots of companies, Infosys, DXC, HP, all of this. And our collective agreements cover 10,000 plus tech workers, support workers, outsourcing workers, because a bit of a gray line between of these activities. And we negotiate things like, of course, pay, terms and conditions, and video highlights a lot the fact that, you know, there's an image outside and there's the realities inside. So there's lots of things to be negotiated, social plans, all of that, and of course with the pandemic, new challenges in this respect, right? Especially when it comes to protection of workers, then return to office, everything is on the table as well, along with, of course, trying to push for more organizing within the sector.
Thank you very, very much, and exciting to hear how your union started some years ago with a handful, and now is over 9,000. I'm sure keep growing. Congratulations for that.
Thank you.
I think that's also Totally deserved. So I want to discuss with you an argument we often hear when we discuss tech workers and organizing. It's often heard that tech workers are so important to the employers that they don't need unions because they can bargain most of the things individually, like their salaries. And so why do we need actually to unionize there? So what would you say about that argument? Why do workers need a union or a unionized works council in Germany? Oliver, what do you say if you have that discussion?
Short answer, every worker needs a union, period. But that's maybe not what you want to hear. The little bit longer answer has, from my perspective, two aspects. The one is the political aspect, the solidarity aspect. That means even if some workers have the leverage to negotiate good conditions for themselves, even there are co-workers of them in the tech company that don't have this leverage. So this is the political part of this within the company and also seen in a bigger scope. So in a union, there is a transfer of money from the parts of the industries that have a lot of money, that have good collective bargaining agreements, to parts of sectors that don't have this. So this is the solidarity aspect, I think. That's one argument why people should join a union. And the other one is a pretty practical one. Even if you have the leverage to negotiate stuff alone, it will still be better collectively. So nobody alone has the leverage. People have to get it collectively. So when it comes to layoffs, that's the most extreme part. Even then, we have seen better packages for people doing this collectively, doing this with the Works Council. And also, not only the layoff example, also payment and whatever. This is all things that can be negotiated better collectively than individually. Nevertheless, how good your leverage is, or what you think how good your leverage is. Because often it is not as good as you think.
Phoebe.
Absolutely. I will just dive into what Oliver said about not everyone having as much leverage as maybe they think or what we think of when we think of tech workers. Certainly, some people in tech companies do have excellent working conditions and super high pay, but definitely not everybody. Even just in Contentful, it's quite inequitable between like engineers and people that work in customer support, for example, or people that take care of the office, or the people that fix your laptop and help set it up for you. Super big disparities in what they're getting paid and also how they're treated. So often those more operational roles are heavily surveilled, treated like a resource, not like a person, and they have much worse working conditions. So not everyone in IT or in tech is really so privileged and powerful as maybe we all like to assume that they are. Also in an international scene like Berlin, it's pretty interesting because people have different types of precarity in their work. So most people that I work with are not Germans or not EU citizens. Almost no one speaks German. And in many cases, their visa and maybe the right of their entire family to stay in Germany depends on this job. So they're certainly going to be less likely to want to rock the boat, negotiate for different conditions, or even really raise their voice if things aren't going well. And lastly, I would say even for the very solidly positioned, high-paid engineers, there's quite a tendency to think, oh, well, if I don't like the policies at this company or how they're treating me, I'll just go to another company because I'm an engineer, I can get a job easily, no problem. But I think what you start to realize is that the issues are the same at all the companies because the issue isn't your one CEO or your one manager. The issue is this system of capitalism that's working against the workers. So I think there's many levels of answers to the question, but unionizing and unions are important for all of these different levels of tech workers.
Thank you very much. Florentine.
Yeah, I think I'm going to pick up from where Phoebe left it, because it is true. It's transcendental, more or less, when it comes to issues. In our case, when we started, the fact that we've won quite a good collective agreement with Alcatel based on a few strikes, but that's a different story. People saw that it's possible, winning. So we've kind of built ourselves like a standardized, more or less, approach towards collective agreements in the tech sector by listening to tech workers. And we've more or less put on the table a set of, let's say, conditions, flavored a bit with their own context. And one win brings another win, and two wins will bring more wins. So probably the most difficult one is the first win. So I think winning was a key factor in terms of when it comes to what kind of type of benefits. All in all, as I said, social protection, inflation rates. Nowadays we see this, pay gaps between seniors and newcomers, and that's a major factor now. Obviously, return to office, all of that. But there's something else we've added on the table, which is trying to increase the idea that it's important for workers to have participation within the life of the company. We work in subsidiaries a lot. There's not much influence. It has to be built from top down, from down to up. And that's, again, something that we put out on the table, telling them that it's really important for them to be at the decision-making table. What happens to me? Right? Not necessarily in terms just of terms and conditions, but also what is the approach, what are the activities that we're going to do, all of that, because it's very volatile, it's very dynamic, and it's very more or less precarious when you're in a subsidiary, and that seems to be working quite well.
Thank you very much. Allow me to add one more thought, because I really think this solidarity moment is super important, why we need the union, and that from several points. I think what we also have seen, what's happening with the outsourced workers, and I think that's the best way if we have the people in the big tech companies working together, same union or same union movement, like the ones who are at the end. We might even call it a supply chain. What do I talk about that? Content moderators, for example, for Meta, for Alphabet, might be outsourced to Africa under very bad conditions. And so, wouldn't it be wonderful if we have this global solidarity of unions from the north and the south? And I think that's something we are at the moment and also seeing in the beginning of building. And it's about helping each other out. The unions, and here when I talk about unions, I will always say worker-led unions, because I think that's important for us in all of our spirit, and that these worker-led unions can help each other. And I think that was also the wonderful thing we have seen around the layoffs, for example, in Google, that we had many more unions now in existence. So we had first the ones in the US, now we have super strong ones, for example, in the UK, in Switzerland, but also in South Korea, in Japan, or I know as Uni we were involved in supporting the one in Poland. So it's really building a global dimension, and I think that's the other thing. Tech workers, the work is global work. It's often international teams. Borders don't count, and I think that's also what I often say to our unions is we need also become like that. Borders don't count. Let's just organize all the workers. I want to go to one, I think, question which I hear before people like very, very much to discuss about it. So after the huge layoff wave in the sector, the mentality of many tech workers towards unions has changed for good, is what I said. And I think you also agreed. So could you talk a bit about what has changed and why? And I think here I really would like to hear first from you, Phoebe.
Sure. So we're lucky, I guess you could say, that at Contentful, where I'm part of the Works Council, we have not experienced layoffs ourselves. However, you can still tell in the workforce that people are scared of this happening because it is so commonplace. Everyone knows someone or has experienced getting laid off themselves. Even with this fear, I think folks are not quite making the jump to joining a union, so there's definitely more work we need to do there to help show that this is #1 way to protect yourself. But even so, I think what's interesting is that layoffs are often what sparks employees to form a works council. I think this audience is mostly German, so I don't need to talk too much about the differences between layoffs when you have a works council or when you don't. You can negotiate much better packages for employees if you do have one. So often, after layoffs happen at a company without a works council, those remaining will use that as a moment to form one. And I think people that are laid off will go to their next company and try and form a works council. So there's one thing. I think even in my company where there haven't been layoffs, there is a lot of growing wariness and discontent. Although there's been no layoffs, people are not getting backfilled after they leave. All the teams are overworked, and everyone is asked to do more with less. And no one is getting rewarded. So there's not promotions, there's not raises, and people are starting to really get upset that they're working so much harder and being asked to sort of fill this gap without any sort of reward. And so I think this is an interesting moment with all the layoffs because people are realizing, oh, this isn't just 1 month or 6 months that I'm being asked to step up like this. It's going to continue to feel like this, where I'm asked to do more with less, and the companies are going to profit, and I'm going to keep staying here without my raise, or maybe even getting laid off next month. So that's my answer.
Thank you very much. Florentine.
Well, I've been organizing in this sector for the last 14 years. I'd say that in the last few years, we've seen, as we call it, like a tectonical shift in mentality of the tech workers. If I remember the days, the beginning, 2010, for example, we had to be very careful on phrasing when talking to tech workers, especially on using the term union. So we would sometimes call ourselves like an association, community, whatever you would want, because breaking the ice with the word union would have to be done in a very specific moment with a very detailed strategy, all of that. You don't see that nowadays. Nowadays, it's safe and it's comfortable to talk about that. So it's an icebreaker that for us it's really, really important and has been an important factor for the growth we had in the last year. Now it's tech workers are used to this. Tech workers are listening, and it's more about what can we achieve together. What can we do together? What are the issues that we want to tackle? All of that, which makes the conversation much more easier. And obviously, this won't necessarily bring everyone to the union, but all in all, I think we are on the right premises for that, and with the proper tools, with the proper approach, I think what has been happening around in the last years will help a lot push for more organizing in the sector, as clearly it's needed, right?
Thanks, Florentine. Oliver.
Yeah, I think for Germany, it's worth noting that the legislation is pretty worker-friendly when it comes to layoffs compared to other countries. It's still not good, and of course we still have way much, where there's a huge room for improvement, but in general it's more worker-friendly than in other countries. So the effects has not been as devastating as in other countries. But still what we can see is, of course, workplaces with works councils and with higher union density, of course, they get better severance packages collectively. They get at least some social fair, I would not say just not fair dismissals, but at least not as unfair as without works councils. And that's something we can see. And as Phoebe said, most people start their works councils after getting layoffs or having layoffs in the company. The better way would be the other way around, having a good works council in place that's trained, that's established in the company, that has the trust of the workers. That would be the better way. But still, it is possible also collectively to get better things. You will not be able to have no layoffs with works councils, of course, but having layoffs is way less hurtful with a works council than without.
Thank you very much. Before we go to the audience and questions, what would you say is in store for the future? What can we expect, and to what should we prepare for in the tech sector? Let's hear from you, Florentine, first.
It's a difficult question, actually. But when it comes to us, what we look for is the sectoral approach. We want to push the union, having a saying at sectoral level now. Probably the ultimate goal is to negotiate a collective agreement at the sectoral level, and that would cover more and more workers. We have in mind a set of a minimum standards that we want to push for the sector, and of course would want to be involved, especially when it comes to this type of approaches like return to office, to have a unified, let's say, approach in such a way that we eliminate undercutting and all of that. And in terms of the sector, I've just add that we feel like the dynamics are going to increase quite a lot in terms of shifts, companies, mergers, acquisition, all of that. And clearly, we will have to be very careful and close to the sector and as I say, push for more unionizing and organizing.
Great. Phoebe.
I think what's to come is even more solidarity between like office workers in tech and outsourced workers. So my favorite example is HelloFresh. It's a tech company. They have a big tech office in Berlin. They deliver these food boxes, and they've started doing a lot of worker activism and forming a works council after some of their Berlin office workers were starting to talk about solidarity for warehouse workers in the United States that were doing union drives in 2 warehouses there. Unfortunately, both of these union drives failed, but the workers in Berlin were talking about these union drives on Slack and started to realize they were being surveilled, and action was starting to be taken against them for saying things in favor of the union drives. And after that, they did an open salary initiative. After that, they started to form a works council. I think this is a really cool example of international and sort of cross-sector solidarity. And I'd like to see that even more in tech. For example, delivery companies, food delivery companies, the workers in the office and building the apps, having solidarity with the conditions for the riders that are delivering the food. Because, like Florentine said, the different sectors really need to stand together for improved conditions for all.
Oliver.
Yeah. To wrap this up a little bit, or try to wrap this up, I would say workers will not get any presents from their companies. They haven't gotten them before the layoffs. They will not get them in the future. This given fact means that hopefully there will be more collective actions in the future to get what they deserve, basically, and to have a say on a sectoral level, on a company level. And personally, I'm pretty optimistic for collective actions to come, and like also for tech companies doing collective bargaining, for example, because this is the way to reduce disparities between the different workers in the company, and also to make wages fair and to make people getting what they deserve, basically. Pretty optimistic, as I said, that this will happen. I think no tech company will be the first one being in the media with like strikes and getting this struggle with getting a collective agreement. But I think once this happened, the first one is there. This hopefully will become a trend, like the works councils. Like there was one works council, and then there's this wave of works councils, and hopefully this is the same with collective bargaining agreements.
We hear there is no way back. That's how I would summarize it. The tech sector will be organized by the workers with the help of the worker-led unions, and I'm sure this will also be important for many other issues. For example, I hear that solidarity is an important issue, and I think that also makes it, from a societal perspective, very interesting, because I remember in Czechia some of the first IT unions were formed just last year around the issue of the environment, just transition. So that's how people came together. And I think having strong unions all around the tech sector will help us tackle ethical issues, environmental issues, and really make a just transition possible. So let's give a big hand to our 3 panelists. Thank you. We have time for some questions. Let's start in the audience. Any question here in the audience, and people online, just write in the chat. We will come to you if there are any. I see here a question.
Hi, thank you for the panel. It was really interesting. I would like to know if you have any experience with freelancers and employed workers organizing together. Thank you.
Who want to start?
I can try to. I think this field is very wide because there are a lot of different models of freelancing. There are some that are legal, there are some that are probably not legal in Germany, but there are also people who want to be freelancers for whatever reasons. So there's some solidarity, and also some unions, of course, are doing stuff with freelancers together, but it's really hard to do this on a company level. What I see is freelance organizing most likely happens on a sectoral level. So try to get some minimum standards for all the people freelancing in a certain sector. But sadly, this hardly happens between on a company level.
Anyone want to add to it?
Unfortunately, no experience.
Well, in Romania, until beginning of the year, we weren't able to unionize them because by law, you would have to have an employment agreement to be part of a union. But that's changed this year. So we're going to move a bit the focus on that as well. Not necessarily figuring out right now what we're going to do, but clearly it's something that we're looking at. But it's quite marginal in news in Romania at this moment.
Okay, let's go to a question which we got online. So tech startups usually have only a few highly qualified employees at the beginning. What incentive is there for them to organize themselves into a union and establish a works council? I think we touched that already a little bit. Let's ask our works council member.
Sure. This is a really interesting question, and it is tricky, I would say, because I'm thinking of the highly qualified, advanced engineers that are there at the beginning, and then maybe a few managers. And I think it's true that the first couple engineers probably don't really feel the need. They probably feel like they're very important, and that they don't need this type of collective power. So it's really. I haven't tried to organize in a small startup in that setting before. I would say that I know in Germany you only need 5 employees that are not leading employees to start a works council, and every person that I tell that to is always shocked because it's such a low threshold. In other places like the Netherlands, you need at least 50 employees. So I would say there's work to be done here to incentivize even kind of early stage, highly skilled workers that in small groups, they also need collective power.
Thank you very much. Anything to add?
A small thing, because I kind of struggle with the term startup pretty often, because my favorite online bank, people are laughing because maybe they know the story. It's N26 here in Berlin. They tried to form a works council, and then the founders of the company always said, "Yeah, we are a startup. We don't need a works council. It makes us slow. Blah 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 blah. All the same shit." But at this time, they had some million people depending on them as a bank. And I was like, you're not a startup, you're like a bank. People depend on your bank, on their bank account. Like they're paying their rent, they get their money from their employer, all this stuff. So you're not a startup anymore. Stop this story. It's just not true. And this is what I hear pretty often with startups. Like many companies, even if they're growing and even if they're venture capital funded, they are not startups anymore. This is a story that is just not true. That's why I'm struggling with the term startup.
And I would like to add to this question, maybe it's really pending what issues people would like to tackle. As I said, maybe it's about the ethical use of AI. And that's something you cannot deal alone. So it might be good being in a big union movement who talks about that. Or maybe it's some different issues. It might not be the pay always, the salary. It might be different. And that's what I think what we need to focus on. It's the issues. Might they be societal, might they be ethical, or might there be something different? And find out to form and use then our tools as the Works Council, the unions, to achieve that in the enterprise, in the startup, maybe a real startup, maybe not, but also at sectoral and level of whole society. So, shall we go to the second online question? Fighting mass layoffs requires resources. Layoff economy also means fewer union members and less income from union members. How do we resist scarcity logic? Who want to start with that?
I can try to, because I think this is also pretty complex question. Try to answer this shortly. Of course, fighting layoffs needs resources. Yes, that's completely true. But that's one thing. Luckily, unions still have often. They have resources. We have resources, especially the big unions. So I think that's also something we can provide. So and that's also I think one of the benefits of big unions is having resources, being able to provide this to members, of course. Maybe we may be slower in certain things than smaller unions and smaller organizations, but we are able to provide these resources. And I'm still optimistic that we can do this in the future too, because union membership is rising again in Germany. This has been the other way around for a long time, and now this changed. And I think that's good news, and that's why I'm pretty optimistic that we will have these resources to fight this also in the future.
Yeah, I would also agree. I think that's a reason actually why we need the unions, because together we have the resources which we wouldn't have alone, and especially not when there are layoffs in a company. And I also think it's about having the expertise as a union, because unfortunately unions have experience with layoffs, with agreements about layoffs, minimizing them. And also I think one really interesting fact is often in the tech sector at the moment, the layoffs, because it was often ununionized sector, rather led to more union members. Sometimes people who have seen, okay, it could be me next, or oh yes, we are also just normal employees, we are not protected forever, started joining the unions. And in other cases, I've heard that, for example, some of the layoff Google workers were proud unionists, and because the unions often have a sectoral approach, they will be in the next company, did set up there a new enterprise union, so started recruiting more members. So I also think it's not per se a loss of members here in that sector, which also makes it very interesting and maybe different to more, I would say, traditional sectors like manufacturing, etc. Florentine, Phoebe, something to add?
I think the points have been touched quite well. Even if we're like a small union, we managed to build up some sort of resistance fund for these cases, but I do agree. The answer is the union, actually. Very good question, actually.
I see more questions here in the room. Go for it. You will get a mic.
Thank you, Owen. I have a question. I would like to know if you see a difference between organizing in the traditional tech sector, like, for instance, telecom here in Germany, and what we now call tech companies, platform companies, big tech companies.
You want to start?
Everyone's looking at me. I worked at Deutsche Telekom a while ago, before I started working with ver.di. Yeah, I think historically, that like often you have structures in place in companies like Deutsche Telekom. So like it's pretty normal to join a union. It's pretty normal that like there's like union merge in the offices. It's pretty normal that there's someone from the union at a works meeting. It's pretty normal that there's collective bargaining. All this is pretty standard union business, let's call it. And this is, of course, something that is not the case in the tech companies, like the startups or the faster growing companies. And often, of course, in the classical tech sector, people are from Germany, they speak German, they know their rights, not as much as they should maybe, but they know at least some basic rights. And that's something we see in tech companies is with the international workforce, in some cases even managers and HR does not know the rules, but in other cases they definitely just make use of workers not knowing their rights. They just know that like it's hard to find resources in English. Not all the laws are translated to English even. So this is the biggest difference, I would say.
Florentine?
Yeah, maybe I'll just add the fact that in these companies, the age groups are much different. So you find quite senior experienced people that somehow have been in touch with the subject, rather than in the new ones, lots of young people that don't know much about it, and it's a completely different approach. But it's in the same line with what Oliver was saying on this. I don't know where it's easier, actually. It depends, because sometimes history is not always in our favor. But yeah, interesting question.
Thank you very much. I see we are already very close to the end of our 45-minute session. We would have so much to talk. Hopefully some of the people here will stay around, that we can have follow-up discussions. If you are online, just reach out. I'm sure we're all happy to have more discussions with you. But to end the panel, I would like to give the word to our tech worker to end. Is there something which hasn't been said, something which is still on your heart you would like to share with us?
I think Florentine said it best, which is that, actually maybe everyone has mentioned this, that issues are not company or even sector specific. We all have to have solidarity across company and sector and country borders, because if there's layoffs at my company, maybe then they will hire people in Romania. Maybe ChatGPT needs thousands of workers in Africa. And so we all need to stand together in solidarity and all organize for more worker power.
Thank you. Wonderful end.